Today, I'll be continuing with my schedule discussion and point spread prediction videos. Today, I'll be doing Indiana. Indiana is another perfect example of how football and academics don't mix very well because they're a terrible football program. They always have been. Uh, Not that they haven't every once in a while had a good year, but they've never had a great team that I know of. And more years than not, they're terrible and uh, miss a bowl game. These last 3 years, they've missed a bowl game every year and won a total of 9 games combined. They only won 3 games last year, and they were the worst team in the Big Ten. They finished last in the conference at 3-9, and only one conference win, and that was pretty bad for them because the Big Ten had plenty of terrible teams. So for them to be the worst of all of them, that was bad. Their offense was horrible, averaging under 20 points a game in regulation at 19.75. And then their defense wasn't very good, giving up on average 28.4 points per game in regulation. Uh, and I don't really think they're going to be very good uh, this year either. They could maybe improve their record by a little bit, but I still think that a bowl game is pretty unlikely for them. They always recruit really low, and this year they recruited outside of the top 50, and they didn't do that well in the portal either. And so the schedule does have a little good news to it. They get 8 home games instead of 7. And Indiana, before being in the Big Ten East Division, had always had to play all of Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State because they were all in the same division. But this year, with the changes in the Big Ten, they were able to avoid having to play all three. They avoided Penn State, but bad news is they weren't able to avoid the two best of those three, most likely Michigan and Ohio State. So they start their season against FIU. Uh, that's one that should be a win. And then Western Illinois, that's a for sure win, I would say, for Indiana. That's an FCS team. And then uh, their last non conference game against Charlotte should be a win, too. So they do have 3 games that are pretty sure wins. FIU and Charlotte aren't 100%, but they're 90 something percent sure to win those, I would say. Uh, and then they start at their conference schedule on the road at UCLA. That's going to be tough to win. That's going to be a long travel for them. UCLA, now is in the Big Ten, but they're really far from each other. Now, UCLA is not a tough place to play, and they're not going to be a very good team, I don't think. They may not even be any better than Indiana this year, uh, but that's one that they could have a chance to win. Then next in the conference, they have Maryland at home. I think now that Maryland may actually be awful this year, losing that quarterback, Tonga Vale. He was really the only player that kept them from being horrible these last couple of years. And they get that one at home, so that's one maybe they could get a win in. And then on the road at Northwestern, that seems like it's probably going to be a loss. I would say 50-50 if Northwestern didn't have so much coming back from last year's team that won 8 games, but they do. And then they take a week off before Nebraska at home. Uh, mm, I'm thinking now that mm, this is very likely going to be a loss for Indiana because I've just recently gotten higher on Nebraska. But they could win it because Nebraska hasn't proven anything on the field yet. Uh, they've been terrible for the last so many years, mm, like Indiana. Mm, and then Washington. So obviously, last year and the year before, there would have been no hope for Indiana. It would have been a blowout, but Washington is a completely different team this year. Now, I still though think they're a better team than Indiana, but Washington does have a bunch of very questionable things on their roster this year. I don't think they're going to be that good, but still, right now, to me, would seem like a loss for Indiana. And then Michigan State on the road, that's one that it would have been nice to have been able to get at home because both teams I think are going to be pretty bad. Michigan State may be able to improve a little bit, like Indiana might, but these two teams were pretty even last year and are both going to be pretty bad, I think, again this year. So they could win it, but uh, home field advantage, makes a difference. And then I see why they took a week off for the second time when they did in between Michigan and Ohio State, but there's no chance of them winning either one, so it's not going to help them with getting a win, but uh, mm, they're going to be so beat up, I think, after Michigan that they don't want to have to deal with two in a row with Michigan and Ohio State. And Michigan is probably going to be a blowout game, even though they lose so much from last year's team. They've still got a much better overall roster than Indiana does. And Ohio State, I remember they played Indiana in their opener last year, and Ohio State's offense really struggled, and it made me kind of doubt that Ohio State was an elite team, and of course they did turn out to be an elite team, winning every game on their schedule except Michigan and barely even losing that game. But in the game, Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka got shut down, uh, and they only scored 23 points in the game. Ohio State did, uh, but it was still a blowout because Indiana's offense was non-existent. So the final score was 23-3, and it may take Ohio State's offense this year a little time to get going a lot with the new offensive coordinator and quarterback, but I can pretty much assure you that their offense will be playing really well at this point of the season, and even if it's not, they're not going to lose to Indiana because Indiana probably won't even be able to get a first down on Ohio State's elite defense. And then they end the season in what is one of the most boring rivalries in college football, Purdue. I've never watched that rivalry ever and have no uh, mm, reason to want to watch it ever. It's kind of a 50-50 game. Both teams are terrible. And Indiana, though, will have an advantage being at home. So that's one that there would be a really good chance for Indiana to get a win in. So now I'll move on to the point spread prediction. So games in the green are games where I think Indiana will be favored to win by a blowout, 20 or more points. and there's one of those Western Illinois. Games in the blue are games where I think Indiana will be favored by double digits, 10 to 19 points, and uh, there's two of those, FIU and Charlotte. Games in the yellow are games where I think Indiana will be an underdog by about a touchdown, 6 to 9 points, and there's three of those: UCLA, Northwestern, and Washington. Games in the gray are games where I think Indiana will be an underdog by about a field goal, 1 to 5 points, and there's three of those: Maryland, Nebraska, and Michigan State. Games in the orange are games where I think Indiana will be an underdog by double digits. Mm, and there's one of those, uh, Michigan, and then uh, games where I think Indiana will be an underdog by a blowout. Mm, uh, there's one of those in the red, Ohio State, and then games in the pink are games where I think Indiana will be favored by about a field goal, 1 to 5 points, and there's one of those Purdue. Western Illinois, the spread in that one should be like 30 points. They should destroy them without any problem. And then FIU and Charlotte, those are close to being in the green, but I put them in the blue because they're not FCS teams, and Indiana is a bad Power Four team. So I think the spread in both of those will probably be like 18 points. And then Maryland, I think they'll be favored probably by like 3 points in this one. And then uh, Nebraska, I think uh, they'll be favored by like three in that one over Indiana. And then Michigan State, they'll probably be favored by like three in that one because it's a road game. I think if Indiana had that one at home, they would probably be a small favorite. Uh, and then UCLA, I think they'll be favored over Indiana by like 6. That would be a great game though at home. Then the same with Northwestern. The spread will probably be about 6. And then Washington, I think the spread in that one will be like 7. And Michigan, I think the spread in that one will probably be like 18 points. And Ohio State, the spread in that game I think will be in the high 20s, like 4 touchdowns. And then Purdue, Indiana, I think may be favored by a point or two because they get the game at home. I think they'd be an underdog though on the road. So I see 4 games where they'll probably be the favorite in, which means they'd have to pull a couple of upsets at least to get to a bowl game. Uh, I wouldn't say there's zero chance, but I think very little chance for Indiana to make a bowl game this year. But that will be it. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon. And please subscribe to the channel.